The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. It's Friday, March 7th, 2025, and more daylight's creeping in as we prepare to spring ahead this Sunday. And here this week, helping us shed light on the week's news, former state senator and current senior counsel at WilmerHale, State Senator Eric Lesser, Greg Sukinnick, news editor at the Berkshire Eagle, and Springfield Republican reporter April May Munford. Good morning, all of you. Thanks for being in studio.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You can join the conversation by emailing us, therundown@nepm.org. That's therundown@nepm.org. Later in the show, details on why the state says that Southwick-Tolland-Granville Regional School District violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And our latest round of the Rundown Pundown as we delve into the recent news in the state's weed industry. First, though, reaction to President Trump's joint address to Congress on Tuesday night. Republicans who watched the address reported that they largely approved of the speech. According to polling, more than 70% said that they deemed Trump both presidential and entertaining. Critics of the speech said it did not adequately demonstrate or accurately discuss the true cost of the savings that the Trump administration says it's identified through its various executive orders and government efficiency efforts. And we heard a lot this week from local reporting about that cost, that impact here directly in the 413. Thus far, that's less access for veterans to services, less money for already promised infrastructure projects in some cities and towns in the region. And if the president's tariffs, which have been kind of on again, paused, off again this week, economists broadly say more expensive products are coming from Mexico and Canada, so long as those tariffs remain in place. Now, Springfield Republican reporter Greta Yoakum reported that Michael Slater was at the U.S. Capitol on Tuesday night. He was invited by Congressman Richard Neal to be his guest. Slater was fired last month from the Springfield Vet Center amid the federal government's purging of thousands of new employees. And Slater said this to Greta, quote, "When it comes to the federal government and budget constraints, it can't be a chainsaw used in the VA to cut money." The Republican, this was in the Republican. It needs to be a surgical approach. Eric, I know that you worked in the Obama White House. You've obviously worked at the state level as well. When you look at, and no stranger to needing to cut budgets and set priorities.
Never brought a chainsaw to a meeting, though. I know that'll shock people to hear.
There's not a photo of that somewhere in the White House archive?
You're not going to find one
That would
either.
be amazing. What do you make of Slater's opinion that this more surgical approach is needed?
Well, first, I really give Michael a lot of credit for standing up and for going to Washington, and I give Richie Neal a lot of credit for elevating his story and bringing him down. I think that this is a really good example of where the abstract policy starts to get very real when it's a cut in your own neighborhood, in your own community for a service that your neighbor or your family member relies on. And, I think that Trump is going to start to feel the political blowback on something like this. The vet cuts were, I think, a bridge too far for a lot of people. It's going to take time for these cuts to kind of work their way into real communities with real consequences, but as that happens, I think you're going to see a pretty significant political blowback.
And one of the immediate consequences we saw was a picture in the Springfield Republican of a sign posted on the vet center's door saying, "Veterans, if you don't have an appointment, please call. We'll get you when we can," essentially. There's no more walking in and saying, "Hey, look, I have this urgent challenge that I need someone to help me kind of talk through and work through right now." Greg, you reported this week that the Silvio Conti Federal Building in Pittsfield has been labeled, quote, surplus, and therefore possibly up for sale by the Trump administration. What is put in limbo if that building is sold?
Quite a bit, Carrie. So the VA's walk-in clinic in Berkshire County is in that building. And so without that as sort of a primary locus for healthcare for veterans. We're talking about a drive to Albany or a drive down Route 9 to Leeds. That's also where the Social Security Administration has its offices. Now, there's a smaller office in North Adams, I believe, but still, there's a lot of older folks in the county for whom, physically reaching out to someone is the preferred way of trying to handle confusion over Social Security or changes in benefits or potential
Perhaps
scams.
they're exactly. I was going to say, in the wake of all the scams we've been seeing, they're uncomfortable using online portals, or just it's not their particular cup of tea. We know some people prefer to interact in person. And also, your reporting said that the website that had listed the property is now, as of this morning when I checked it again, the property is no longer on that list. The list doesn't even exist, right?
Well, actually, we talked to Congressman Neal about this a little bit, and he said it's kind of par for the course that it's sort of throwing something against the wall, see if it sticks, and it doesn't even last the day. So all it does is creates a lot of uncertainty.
We should also say Congressman Neal has one of his district offices in that building.
Yes, I forgot
too.
to mention that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. And I did, April, did you want to add something?
I did. This makes me question how many of the surplus buildings have Democratic offices in it.
Right.
Good question.
Well, on that point, did people see the article about how the Obama Library Archives in Chicago also got its lease cut? So it makes you wonder what's behind this list.
That is a very interesting point.
But the other buildings on this list, the IRS Center in Andover, 2 office towers in Boston. These aren't small. One could argue, well, Pittsfield, okay, 40,000 people. But the JFK building, the Tip O'Neill building, those are major government complexes.
And the General Services Administration said that it owns and maintains more than 440, quote, non-core assets representing nearly 80 million square feet, and divesting those properties and their maintenance costs could save more than $430 million in operating costs. That's according to the agency and what you put into your reporting, Greg. But if sold, the agencies said that perhaps there's some different bargains that could be struck where these agencies could stay in place, such as a sale leaseback where the government would sell the building but then immediately lease it back from the new owner. So it's being potentially flexible about whether, even if it does sell, which we don't know now if that's the case, whether people could remain in place. So lots of open questions on that one, I think. April, last week you reported about the city of Holyoke grappling with the Trump administration's decision to claw back $20 million in federal grants, including $19 million for critical infrastructure projects. What are some of those projects we're talking about, April?
We are talking about urban tree forestry. We're talking about there
was a $3 million centrifuge, I think, for wastewater treatment plant, $1 million for identifying revenue generating opportunities, something that we've seen done in Boston. And what was the reaction from the city of Holyoke when you talked to Mayor Garcia about these cuts?
Mayor Garcia regretted loss over both grants. He says he remains committed to advocating for the resources that the community so desperately needs. I think that one thing we're going to see is that resilience is going to come out of this, however devastating it might be.
One of the things that I was struck by Mayor Garcia, he seemed very optimistic in the face of this, right? Saying, look, we're going to work to find the funding elsewhere. We're already appealing to some state legislators for their help, for their support. Eric, you've held elected office. A lot of it's put on a happy face and, be optimistic where you can be. But do you think that Mayor Garcia is being overly optimistic in the face of this challenge? So much money is on the line right now, and a lot of people are scrambling to make up the difference.
I actually give him a lot of credit for having an optimistic tone, because I think that's really what you need. I would connect it back, actually, the contrast between some of the local officials that have to really deal with the real-world consequences of this compared to the kind of game show you see playing out in Washington, D.C. I got to say, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm proud of my party. I thought Alyssa Slotkin did a great job with the response. I was kind of embarrassed watching some of the members on the floor who were reacting to President Trump's speech. I think the kind of auction paddles waving in the air.
Some people were holding up signs
just
that
was
said
a little
false.
Yeah, and meanwhile you've got a mayor on the ground here, Josh Garcia, who's projecting optimism and confidence, which is what his city and what his people need. So, what we've seen with Trump, what we saw in the first term, what we're seeing again now is just what Greg mentioned. They throw huge amounts of information, huge amounts of pronouncements against the wall. A lot of it is intended to bait people into reactions that become counterproductive. And the courts are beginning to stop a lot of the things that he's put forward. So I think people need to kind of grow a backbone, clear-eyed, stay focused on what really matters here and project positivity and confidence, and that's going to be the way we get out of this.
I heard NPR. Oh, Pearl, go ahead.
I think though that the people they're going to be suffering, and that's what's going to really matter, how the people feel. I know hazardous trees has come up for Holyoke in several wards, just particularly in Ward 1, where Carmen Ocasio successfully petitioned orders to cut down trees that were banging on people's windows, breaking them even, bringing in asthma and breathing health problems, as well as like insects that could be carrying like Triple E or West Nile. I think that people are going to live with the impact of these cuts.
While the information is being sorted through, NPR reported this week something along the lines of 100 lawsuits have been filed as President Trump has released this flurry of executive orders and the Department of Government Efficiency has been doing its work. Are you surprised that you haven't seen more lawsuits?
I was going to say that sounds like a low number. I think it's more than hundreds. I think actually what you're starting to see is as these challenges wind their way through the courts, you are seeing courts push back. There's been more than 10 temporary restraining orders nationwide issued just in the last month. You saw the Supreme Court push back on the USAID cuts. So there is a growing opposition. I think Democrats and people kind of on the outside right now are trying to figure out the best way and the best places to push back. But I do think that there is some cautious optimism in seeing these courts, including judges appointed in Trump's first term by him, supporting some of these restraining orders and supporting some of these measures. The question will be the enforcement and whether those court orders are followed, and that's going to be a big next step to keep an eye on.
Craig Sukanik.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that Republicans only enjoy slight majorities in the Senate and the House, and at some point constituents are going to decide perhaps that they've had enough. And actually, I did ask Congressman Neal about this. It didn't wind up in the story, but as sometimes the best stuff falls to the cutting room floor.
That's what we're here to talk about.
What are you hearing from Republicans? And he said what he's hearing from them personally and what they're saying in public are two very different things. And at some point, where's the tipping point? I guess that's the question. I guess we get to figure that out in real time.
I happen to think the tipping point is going to come with the calls. Excuse me. The Holyoke tax rate, with the centrifuge would have saved taxes or ratepayers a lot of money, and I think that one of the things that can be argued on both sides is how to save ratepayers and taxpayers money in Holyoke, right? And so once those calls start coming in, I think that's when we're going to see opinions change.
It will be absolutely interesting to keep watching. A few other things that we could touch on. Tariffs were a big part of what was the president has made in the news this week. Domenico Montanaro reported that Trump delivered his speech on the day that steep tariffs against Mexico and Canada took effect. In the address, he defended them, describing tariffs as, quote, saving the soul of the country. As of this morning, though, there's been some back and forth, and Trump again reversed himself and is delaying tariffs against Mexico and Canada. Jim Kinney did some fantastic reporting in the Springfield Republican about the impacts here in the 413. I encourage anyone to go and check out that reporting, the Springfield Republican newspaper Mass Live website. Some really in-depth reporting there that we won't have time to dive into this morning. But keep it here on the Rundown, because we are going to be back. When we come back, we are going to talk about the impact of the Southwick School District breaking a federal civil rights law and another round of the Rundown Pundown. Stay here. I'm Carrie Saldo. This is 88.5 NEPM. Good morning. Welcome back to the Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo, joined in studio by the Springfield Republicans, April May Munford, Greg Sukinnick of the Berkshire Eagle and former State Senator Eric Lesser. Welcome back to all of you. You can join the conversation by emailing us, therundown@nepm.org. That's therundown@nepm.org. April, I want to turn to some reporting from you this week in the Springfield Republican. Quote, the Southwick School District broke federal civil rights law when it failed to protect a victim of racial bullying last year and now must have systemic changes in place by April, according to a recently released state decision. April, before we discuss this latest development, can you just remind us of how we got here?
How we got here is a pattern of years to little to no action by the district to prevent this bullying. In Skyla's case, she had been bullied and racially harassed in a hostile school environment for almost a year. And the adults she trusted to keep her safe and her parents to keep her safe, and some community members say they didn't prevent it from escalating. What happened was racial epithets had been said to her numerous times, and then it accumulated into a mock slave auction on Snapchat, which included bids from white students on Skyla and another student for $2 and $4.
And we're saying her name because the Lopez family has come forward about what their daughter has gone through, as has Skyla.
Yes.
The other student has not come forward
Yes.
publicly. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education issued its report, and the Republican got a redacted copy, which you reported on. And the report found that the school investigated just one of 3 complaints that were filed, and that, quote, it knew or should have known of a hostile environment based on race. April, given those findings, what changes does the school need to make now, according to the state?
So the state has to remove the word viable from its bullying reporting.
The district, right?
The district, excuse me, has to remove the word viable, and they must investigate all reports of bullying, not just the ones that they deem viable. And that brings a point to mind where bullying has to take place in 3 instances. And so reducing that amount reduces the action. Other corrective actions is to align the number of days in their bullying and anti-bullying policy and procedures, and then also comply with the state attorney general's 12-step.
So if I'm zooming out here, what I'm hearing are some minute changes to a policy. But really, I think what this community needs and what we've been watching in Western Massachusetts for years is a really pernicious problem with bullying. We had students who committed suicide, 3 since Carl Hoover Walker when he was a young boy in the early 2000s. And this is a problem that the legislature, there were new laws that were passed. We have even seen a Springfield attorney come forward and call on the legislature to make additional changes. Lauren Mangini called on the legislature to address the lack of enforcement and accountability for cases of pervasive bullying. But do you think that is going to get to this problem, the root of this problem, Eric Lesser?
Well, so first in this case, and really incredible reporting all along the way about what was happening in Southwick. This was a case of bullying, but we have to also be clear. This was a case of racism and racial discrimination, which is different than bullying. I mean, bullying is obviously a serious problem, but this was bullying and racism. So it implicates different laws and has, I think, a different sense of urgency as well. The challenge is going to be the policy on the paper may have been improved and arguably has been improved by this intervention by the state. The question is how does it jump from the paper into the practice and the culture of the schools? And that's a much harder issue that has to be resolved by the community. So I hope that in addition to the legal and policy changes, the community works on fostering dialogue, fostering inclusive community spaces with each other, and tries to get at the root of the culture that would allow something like this to happen.
April.
I think that this is a very small change, and it's an important one. However, the district also has to make discipline changes as well. I think that we see that students are not taking the actions by certain school members seriously, and they're even after 6 students were charged, there was more hateful scrawlings on the bathroom walls. And I think that we see this over and over again. We also see the district. This is not the only time that this has happened. We see the district in another case, 4 out of 9 instances were not reported.
And so what has the district said in response to this?
So the district has given me a statement after my story was published, and while the superintendent, Jennifer Willard, said while the findings recognized that the district responded with urgency and took disciplinary educational measures to address the matter, we also recognize that there is always room for growth and improvement, she said.
Greg Sukinik.
Urgency would have been dealing with it the first time.
That part.
I guess I think that says everything I needed to say about that.
Allison Lopez, who is Skyla Lopez's mother, gave a statement to Nirvani Williams of NEPM, and she said, quote, while she was pleased with the important step of compliance that has been taken, quote, Southwick continues to struggle with racism, bullying, and DEI. Students of color continue to struggle and face racism or some form of discrimination. She said that if administrators are not held accountable, quote, there will be no change. So, April, we appreciate your reporting. You'll keep us updated on this. We're going to move on now to some reporting from Greg Sukenik. And my favorite part of the morning will be our discussion of the Rundown Pundowns. The headline on this one, report sheds light on cannabis trends and more than $8 billion in sales. Now, I would have gone with report highlights personally, but with that pun, you guessed it. It is time for another Rundown Pundown. As we weed through the latest cannabis news, I'm going to be planting puns here and there, and our listeners can keep track. You can email the rundown at nepm.org. The person who gets the closest to the correct number will send you something fun. State House News Service reporter Colin Young, more than 6 years in, the legal cannabis industry landscape in Massachusetts has had a chance to evolve, and a new industry report examines some of the trend lines. Published by the Cannabis Control Commission last week, the report shows an evolution that has been marked by plummeting sales and rising product potency, a network of retail stores that more densely dot the map in some part of the state than others, incomplete efforts around ensuring the legal cannabis world is a diverse one, and a sales volume that's slowing way down as other states legalize, and just the novelty wears off. Greg, you reported that Bloom Brothers in Pittsfield, a dispensary, they had to be blunt with some employees this week. What did you learn?
Well, what we learned is they did not tell us exactly how many, but they said they tried to stave off layoffs for a while. They took actually losses of $25,000 a month, if memory serves me correctly. My apologies if that's incorrect.
That's what I remember reading.
To try to prevent them from laying off any employees, but it just the reality of the situation finally kind of came around. This sort of led to some more reporting that's going to appear in the Berkshire Business Journal, which is one of our associated publications, about sort of the overall picture of the cannabis industry in Berkshire County, and about how prices were high. But that those heady days are over now because they've plunged from $14 a gram to $4 a gram. And I think what's interesting is that the state still has record gross sales numbers, but imagine how much more tax revenue it would have had if you had prices that were somewhere that hadn't dropped, maybe double that, $8 a gram.
I think it's also really interesting to watch this idea that a lot of people were very eager to say, yes, we cannabis when recreational pot was first legalized, and the legislature decided that cannabis licenses would be issued to really anybody who met the requirements and paid the fees. That's very unlike what we do with alcohol, right, where we say there's a cap per community, and here's the number per community. In hindsight, Eric Lester, I know that you were in the legislature when this law came about. In hindsight, maybe being 2020, was that a misstep to go that route?
Well, not gonna say the industry is up in smoke here, but there was always going to be an expectation of a correction. The goal was to make it similar to liquor sales, the way you have package stores in many communities, and really it's kind of commoditized. I think people need to remember some of the recent history. The industry grew at a time when our neighboring states did not have legal marijuana. Then you had COVID, which saw a big spike in usage. The market is now leveling out and normalizing. And I think one of the complexities that we have to keep an eye on is some of the dysfunction at the Cannabis Control Commission. At the same time, we have this very critical question about where the market goes from here. There's going to be a correction. There's going to be stores that close. Prices are going to come down. This is supply and demand. Our neighboring states now have it. You've got stores continuing to open, and they're now opening probably beyond where the demand is. We need the Cannabis Control Commission in a functional place managing this correctly, or you could see a lot of layoffs and a lot of dislocation.
New executive director came on this week, Travis Ahern, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. April May Munford.
I think I've seen both ends of the spectrum in Holyoke and West Springfield, my two beats. So in Holyoke, the conversation has been about oversaturation, whereas in West Springfield, the conversation was about opening up late and losing out on all that money and taxes. However, the mayor Reichelt, he limited to certain spots, and there's only a few there, so it's not oversaturation. So.
Right,
Greg
that's the
Sukenik.
balance.
Oh,
yeah.
I just have to remember, this is an industry that employs more than 20,000 people in the state. And the revenue's still going to be there. The tax revenue will probably still be there. But what happens to the people who lose their jobs as a result of getting rolled into this? I'm still trying.
From a public health point of view, though, something to also keep in mind is as the unit economics goes down and as the competition increases and the sector commoditizes, you're going to see innovation in the products. There was this point about the increased potency. As the stores compete with each other over a shrinking share, you're going to see more innovation on edibles, more potency. That has public health consequences, more aggressive marketing, pushing the envelope on how they market. So again, this is the public policy element here. You've got a shrinking market, a more competitive market. What does that mean for the health of the public that's consuming this?
And then in addition to that, back to the business side of it, we still have yet to hash out really delivery, which is largely concentrated in Boston, even though it's been around for a few years now. And there was some discussion about Northampton, but when I clicked on the link to get a delivery in Northampton yesterday, it bumped me out to a website in Boston. So, and then the other piece is the cannabis cafes, right? In Colorado, which legalized in 2014 and rolled out cafes in 2018, we have yet to have these on-site consumption places opened, which is potentially another opportunity for people, potentially people of color who were supposed to get really a first foothold in this market, and we haven't seen that. The data doesn't support it. It's a predominantly white industry, both among ownership and employees. So I'm really interested to see if the continued evolution of this might make some change there for folks. All right, well, that wraps up this edition of the Rundown Pundown, the latest in cannabis news from the 413. I'm going to move us on to our Scoops, Praise, and Prediction, where we ask our panel to make a prediction about the news, dish about a story they're working on, or heap some praise on a newsworthy nugget. Greg Sukenik, Scoop, Praise, Prediction?
Praise for a couple of my colleagues, Claire O'Callahan and Mary Jane Williams, who did some reporting on how the Trump cuts are affecting veterans and housing.
April May Munford, Scoop, Praise, Prediction?
I'm doing a scoop right now. So we're taking a look at bad landlords in Holyoke. So just keep an eye on that. I did a story about the the office building that was in squalor that recently had an order to vacate.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that reporting coming out from the Republican. Eric Lesser, maybe I'm guessing you don't have a scoop. Perhaps you do. What do you have?
No scoop
what's on your
for me,
mind this morning?
But I'll give a plug. We had a great book was released by PJ Library, which is a Western Mass foundation, called Next Year in the White House, which tells the story of the Obama White House Seders, which were the first time that an American president had celebrated Passover in the White House. There's going to be a reading with the author Rich Mickelson at the Eric Carle Museum this Sunday at 2 p.m. People should check it out. I'll be joining as one of the people who had participated in those for 8 years. A little bit of a throwback to a calmer, maybe more sane time, but 2 p.m. on Sunday at the Eric Carle Museum.
And if memory serves, you are pictured on the cover art of said book.
A very old picture, much thinner back then.
A younger Eric Lesser on the cover of that book. I have praised this week for NEPM's news director, Sam Hudzig. His commitment to diligent, fair, and creative news coverage has been a real boon for this region. Sam is moving on to the next chapter, and we are so grateful for the work that he has done here at NEPM. He's staying in Western Mass, though, so we're really delighted about that. My thanks to this morning's group, former State Senator Eric Lesser, Greg Sukenik of the Eagle, and at Pearl May Munford. Have a great day, everyone.